Harry Houdin. Houdin, we'll say Houdin, one of the most versatile magicians and performers that you've never heard of. Born in Ireland in 1830, 40 years before the famous Harry Houdini, Harry Houdin toured Australia and New Zealand in the mid-1800s, doing drawing room magic and impersonations. He finished quite a short life in New Plymouth, never achieving anything like the great fame of the man whose name is so close to his. But he did attract the attention of a magician in America. Tom Interville is a member of the Academy of Magical Arts and International Brotherhood of Magicians. And with the help of Puke Ariki's Research Centre in New Plymouth, Tom has written an e-book called Harry Houdin, the Great Polynational Mimic. And you can download it free. We've got a link on our website and our Facebook page, Afternoons with Jim Mora. Tom Interville is on the line with us from San Diego, California. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm well, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
How did you discover this obscure magician? Well, he probably wasn't obscure at the time, who ended up in New Plymouth.
Well, to me, he was obscure. I had never heard of him either, and I'm very much into researching Harry Houdini. In fact, I created a website called Houdini in the New York Times. So I've always been a huge Houdini fan since the time I was a child. And so I always wondered if there was a man by the name of Harry Houdini before Houdini was actually born in 1874. So I randomly looked up different newspaper articles, and I looked all over the place, and I honestly didn't expect to find anything, but I came across Harry Houdin's name, not to be confused with Houdini, of course. And I at first thought it was a typographical error. So I looked into several articles, and yeah, this was a real guy. And he was not only a magician, but he was a singer and an actor and a dancer and a comedian. And so it caught my attention, and the more I read, the more interested I became. I initially wanted to just write a blog about it, but then, as I said, I got more immersed into the reading, and I thought, this would make a great article. And then that article turned into an e-book. And so that's generally the origin of how I heard of this guy.
So the famous Harry Houdini was born in, 1874, so there's no way he could have known about Harry Houdin.
Well, he might have heard of him. I mean, Houdin got press early on. Probably not. But, Houdini was about 12 years old, maybe at the time. Well, actually, I'm getting my dates mixed up. But long story short, it's unlikely Houdini heard of him, but it is possible, I'd say.
Is it possible, though, that they both borrowed the Houdin name from someone else, though?
Well, Houdini borrowed his name from Jean Eugène Robert-Houdin, the great French conjurer, who was also a 19th century magician. He's known as the father of modern magic. So Houdini did not borrow his name, definitely from Harry Houdin, of course. I was not theorizing about that at all.
No. But it's possible that our Harry Houdin borrowed his name from the same source.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's in fact, not only did he borrow the name, he claimed to be Robert-Houdin's nephew. And I'm extremely doubtful of that.
But the Harry's a coincidence. The fact they both chose Harry because, he was Robert, not Harry.
That's right. Well, now you're talking about Robert-Houdin?
Yeah. I mean, if they were both borrowing the Houdin name, it's odd that both Harry Houdini and our Harry Houdin ended up being called Harry.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing that caught my interest was how Houdin's name was so close to Harry Houdini. So it's sort of a very novel name, and even back then it was probably pretty novel. But I think that his name, Harry Houdin, his real name, he was born Martin Harry Dignam. So his middle name was Harry as well.
Okay, gotcha.
And as for his last name, as we already discussed, he took it from Robert-Houdin, who apparently was maybe a hero of his, or I'm not sure. But the name Dignam, that's an Irish well, it's a variation of an Irish surname,
Yep.
Donegan. So that's why I suspect he was born. Houdin was born in 1830. I suspect in Ireland. I couldn't find any conclusive evidence to back that up, but just when I pieced everything together, it all sort of makes sense. Not only the origin of his name, but he also had an affinity for Irish dances and such.
Gotcha. Okay. In terms of how good our Harry Houdin was, Tom Interval, he was quite acclaimed as a magician, wasn't he?
Back then, between 1860 and 1863, which is when he toured, he got excellent reviews. But only within that span of 3 years. I couldn't find anything before then or after then. So he basically toured Australia and New Zealand between those years. One newspaper claimed he performed in England earlier than that, but I found absolutely no evidence to support that. So long story short, he performed between 1860 and 1863, and then his time in New Plymouth, that was I believe he began in February 1863.
All right. And he had one of his trademarks, I understand, you'll probably know more than this, more than me about this, he had an inexhaustible bottle from which and the audience used to taste it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, an audience member would name their favorite drink, for instance, rum or milk or wine or anything, and he'd actually pour that drink from one bottle, and he'd pour it into a glass, and then they'd actually taste it to verify that it was indeed the drink. So, and in fact, that trick is still performed today.
It's a good trick. Don't tell me how it's done. But he was versatile. You said that earlier. He could do all sorts of things.
That's the thing. He wasn't just a magician, and that's what kept my interest. He was a singer and a dancer and an actor, as I said earlier, and he would call himself, he called himself the Great Polynational Mimic. Generically, he called himself a polynational entertainer, meaning that he mimicked these fictitious international characters. He would dress up like them, and he would sing their songs, and he would dance their dances, and he would sing the songs in their languages as well. So apparently, he was a very talented guy, and I can only go by the original newspaper articles and such, but most of the reviews he received were good, and even the ones that were bad, that was only part of the good reviews. So yeah, this guy was an incredibly talented person. I wish I knew more about him, and in fact, Mike Gooch at Pukeariki is actually contacting someone there. They kind of got interested in Houdin, and they're going to do further research. So hopefully they can turn up something on the local level that'll tell us a lot more about this guy.
What a fascinating character. He did some dangerous things like Harry Houdini, not perhaps as grand, but he was injured a few times, wasn't he?
Well, you know what? Those injuries had nothing to do with his magic or his performance. Well, actually, that's not true. One time in Australia, he fell off a horse. And then another time he was on stage and he twisted his ankle. But I don't think it was related to any trick. He actually, to my knowledge, did not perform anything dangerous. He advertised what he called the celebrated gun trick, and that's also known as the bullet catch. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with
Yes,
the bullet
I am.
catch?
I am.
Okay, well, I could find absolutely no information or evidence that he actually performed it. He did advertise it, though, once, but there were no reviews about it or anything like that. So
there were magicians.
To my knowledge, I'm sorry.
No, I jumped in too soon. I was going to say that the bullet catch was a famous trick, and there were magicians. There were people who thought it was fake, and you just had a bullet in your mouth and you spat it out, pretending to have been shot at. But there were magicians who died doing that trick, weren't there?
Yes, there were. Without revealing anything as to how it was done, it's definitely a dangerous trick. But make no mistake, it is an illusion. And if someone claims to have done it for real, they were lying,
right.
for lack of a better term. But but even so, even as an illusion, it's very dangerous to perform in certain circumstances, especially back then.
We should know more about Harry Houdin, shouldn't we? Because he obviously just wasn't another itinerant performer. He was a very classy performer.
Well, you would think. I mean, the only other thing I know about him, in addition to his magic and his music, he was apparently a photographer, and he might have even been a barber, or at least owned a barber shop. So, because there are records to indicate he was definitely a photographer, perhaps before he was an entertainer, and definitely after he was an entertainer.
And he entertained for the troops in the New Zealand Wars too, Tom.
Correct. I believe that was at Camp St. John, if I'm not mistaken.
Gee, he'd make a good subject for a drama, wouldn't he, Harry Houdin?
I think he would too. I do think he would. And regarding the New Zealand Wars, I wish there was a little more information on his performances during that time. I couldn't find anything about that.
So Harry Houdin, the Great Polynational Mimic, is your book, and very generously you're offering free downloads of it. Are you going to pursue this anymore and try and flesh out more details of his life, Tom?
Yes, if I hear from Mike Gooch, I'll definitely. I'm going to do a little more research on my own, but I have other projects I'm working on now. So no, but yes. Not proactively, but if I hear more information from Mike or anyone else at Puke Ariki, I'll definitely update the book and maybe even do a little more writing about this man, because he was a very, very interesting character, very versatile and apparently talented entertainer, but there are still many unanswered questions about Houdin.
He might not have been an escape artist, Tom, but he apparently escaped from a capsized boat off the coast of New Plymouth. What happened there?
That's correct. Well, there was a capsized boat, as you said, and actually everyone survived except one man. But Houdin did survive. Honestly, I don't know much more about that accident in terms of Houdin's involvement in that accident. But he wasn't. Apparently, he was not injured too seriously, because he did perform after that. Maybe several weeks later he performed. But
what happened to him in the end? He didn't have an easy life, did he? He was hospitalized and called a lunatic at one stage.
Yes, he was called a lunatic. It was about in 1865, I think, and his doctor called him a, quote, confirmed lunatic. And who knows? Who knows what he meant by that? I mean, was he really crazy? Was he institutionalized till the rest of his life? But yeah, he was apparently in the hospital, and his doctor, said that, and it was reported in the Taranaki Herald, I believe. And we don't really know a lot more about Houdin after he performed, although his obituary, or actually two of his obituaries, they claim he was paralyzed for the last 3 or 4 years of his life. And I'm not sure if there's any correlation between something that happened to him that I'm not sure if it had to do with him having mental issues. I don't even know I don't trust the fact that he was a lunatic, to be honest. But something apparently happened, and he was paralyzed until his death.
Gosh. And he was only 39.
He was only 39 years old, and I'm not sure what life expectancy was back then. I'm sure it was a lot younger than it is today, but I would imagine 39 is, before his time, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. And he's buried in Te Henui Cemetery in New Plymouth, and his wife's there beside him.
His wife, Martha, is beside him, that's correct. And we know very little about his wife as well. She married a man, I have his name written down, I should have known this, but she married another man, and she lived until the age of 95. She died in 1920. Okay. And in fact, again, thanks to Mike Gooch, he found some information about Houdin's wife's death, and that's what led us to discover, Mike discovered Houdin's real name, Martin Dignam. So thanks to those records. But yes, his wife lived to the age of 95.
Gosh, you've unearthed fascinating information. This has been a great project. Thank you for it, Tom. Very nice to talk with you. We'll be keen to see if there are any updates or sequels.
Okay. Jim, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
That's American magician Tom Interval, who was researching Harry Houdini and has come up with all this information about our own Harry Houdin. He's written The Great Polynational Mimic, and he was talking to us from San Diego.